Everyone for joining us today. We're really excited about this initiative and the opportunity to meet with you today and discuss this further. Before I present our consultant who will be making the presentation, I just want to reiterate the main objectives of this meeting, which is to receive your feedback on the management of the urban forest in the district, your vision for the urban forest moving forward, and whether there's anything we've missed in our objectives for the urban forest management plan. We'll have time to take questions, but the objective is to ensure that the plan reflects the community's values, and we're hoping you'll be able to help with that tonight. I'd like to now present Camille Lefrancois. She's from Diamond Head Consultants, and she is developing the urban forest management plan for the district with her team. Her team has lots of experience developing these types of plans for municipalities across Canada, particularly in the Lower Mainland and down in the States, and tailoring the plans and its actions and priorities to the unique characteristics of a municipality. Diamond Head has also developed the Tree Regulations Toolkit for Metro Vancouver, which outlines available approaches to regulate trees, increase canopy cover, and other tools that will be used in the development of the plan for this district. With that, I will pass it over to Camille to make a presentation on the district's state of the urban forest and the next steps in developing the urban forest management plan.
Thanks, Heather. And please, nice to see everyone this evening. Please bear with me just for a second here while I get my screen sharing going, and we'll get started shortly. So as Heather mentioned, my name is Camille Lefrancois. I'm an environmental planner with Diamond Head Consulting and project manager on West Vancouver's urban forest management plan. Diamond Head is located in Vancouver, and I've been with the company for about 7 years now. We specialize on managing natural environments in and around cities and urban areas, and are really pleased to be working with the District of West Vancouver on this initiative. In terms of how this evening is going to go, as was mentioned earlier, I'll be starting with this presentation, and then we'll focus on hearing from you joining us this evening. So my presentation should last about 20 minutes, and I'll start by giving you an overview of our project and the work that we've completed today. And then we'll really focus on giving you a preview or an overview of the findings that are presented in our State of the Urban Forest report. And then we'll close the presentation by just touching up on what we'll be working on in our next steps for the project and drafting the urban forest management plan for West Vancouver. Before I get into the details of what our work will entail in this project, I always like to start by making sure that everyone in the room is on the same page in terms of what it is that we're here to talk about today. And that begins with understanding what we mean when we talk about the urban forest. And the urban forest, in fact, describes all trees, vegetation, and soil that are found within your parks, along streets, and surrounding forest, and on private property throughout a municipality. And urban forestry as a field has been one that has been rapidly developing. There's a lot of literature and interest both in the academic world as well as in many local governments in terms of better understanding and managing the urban forest as an important resource. Now, when we talk about West Vancouver in particular, the urban forest is really located within your urban containment boundary. So what you see on this map here, we're talking about the urban forest being located below the 1,200 feet line, which is essentially including all of your existing neighborhoods, as well as the area in orange, which is showing undeveloped lands that are included in your containment boundary. So although there's a lot of forest above that, when we're talking about the urban forest in terms of this scope of work and this management plan, we're really focused on that area that is closest to homes and developments, as well as where people generally live and work throughout the district. Now, why is it that we are talking about the urban forest to begin with and wanting to manage it better? Well, there's extensive literature, as I'm sure many of you are familiar with, about the many benefits of trees. And of course, there's many that we could list and discuss here. Just as a few examples, of course, we know that trees provide a great number of environmental benefits, like capturing and filtering stormwater or providing shading and cooling benefits. They also provide a lot of aesthetic benefits and contribute to the character of our communities and landscapes. They're important habitats, certainly for wildlife and to support a greater biodiversity. And they can also provide us with resources like food and medicines. And there's a lot of research as well that demonstrate that trees, a tree canopy and green space in general have a lot of really positive mental and physical health benefit for our communities. And as was pointing out in our last open house as well, of course, the urban forest, trees and vegetation and soils in general are of course an important part of both mitigating climate change as well as helping our communities adapt to climate change thanks to a lot of the benefits that they provide. And because of all those benefits that are increasingly recognized, a lot of municipalities have been moving in the last few decades towards better understanding their urban forest as a resource so that they can manage it in order to really seek to maximize those benefits to their community while managing and minimizing any risks that are related to this. And when developing the District of West Vancouver's urban forest management plan, we're really anchoring ourselves from that starting point of really looking to maximize the benefits that your urban forest is and can continue to provide. In terms of what the plan itself will do, it will be certainly establishing a baseline of information about what we know of the current state of the urban forest. It will also be setting a vision, goals and targets for managing the urban forest, and then developing an action plan with a set of recommendations for implementation over the next 15 years. And of course, those recommendations will be seeking to provide a way for the district to achieve its vision and goals. In terms of the work that we've completed to date, the project is really broken up in 3 main phases. Phase 1, which was recently completed, was about getting a better understanding of the state of the urban forest. And we are now in phase 2, which is focusing on public engagement to better understand the community's concerns, objectives, and ideas about urban forest management. And phases 1 and 2 will then be informing us into our next phase of work, which will be to draft and develop the urban forest management plan for the district. Our main deliverable submitted to date is a state of the urban forest report, which was presented to your council last month. This report really focuses and contains a lot of baseline mapping and metrics about what we know of the current state of your urban forest. It takes a detailed look at your municipal program for urban forest management, as well as policies that are in place both to regulate and or that impact the urban forest, and includes some peer city comparison information for municipalities that share some similarities with the District of West Vancouver. And finally, also includes a report card, which looks at how the municipality's urban forest management program compares with a set of sustainable criteria and indicators that were developed in research that can help us understand how management at the district compares with current best management practices. And so as I mentioned, the main piece of my presentation, of course, is to give you a better overview of what is included in our findings from the State of the Urban Forest Report. And before I dig into what we found, always good to explain the first and perhaps biggest or most common metric that we speak to in this report and when we talk about urban forest in general, which is canopy cover. And canopy cover describes the area that is occupied by a tree crown, so tree branches and foliage when looking from above. And it essentially describes often as a percentage the amount of land that is covered by tree cover when looking from above. And it is a metric that is very common, again, to the field of urban forestry and is often used to assess both the health and the extent of the urban forest, better understand its distribution, as well as patterns and changes in the urban forest over time, and certainly an important one for the state of the urban forest and for developing West Vancouver's urban forest management plan. So our team took a look at some data from light detection and ranging, also called LiDAR, as well as aerial imagery to extract 2021 canopy cover data, and found that within your urban containment boundary, the canopy cover in 2021 was at 51%, meaning that 51% of lands within your urban containment boundary is covered by tree canopy cover. And the map here shows in little 1 hectare grid area, areas that have most to least canopy cover, with the darkest green being, of course, where you find most canopy cover, and then the whitish gray color where you have least canopy cover. And this can tell us a lot from a quick glance in terms of some of the patterns for the distribution of that 51% canopy cover. And of course, the undeveloped areas within your urban containment boundary are clearly an area where there's a lot of tree density. And similarly, large parks like Lighthouse Park really come up clearly. Certainly more urbanized areas like Ambleside come up with much less canopy cover than a lot of those other areas. And then you can also notice some interesting patterns. So for example, the riparian areas along Rogers Creek and McDonald Creek, which are highlighted here, that really come up and clearly show corridors where tree canopy has been maintained and is very present throughout the district. Now, once we had an understanding of current canopy cover, another important piece to understanding the state of the urban forest was to get a sense of change and whether there was any trend in change over recent years. And so in order for us to do that, our team conducted a similar analysis with 2018 data so that we could compare how canopy cover had changed between 2018 and 2021. And the map you see here is essentially showing areas in red where we found canopy loss, as well as areas in green where we found canopy gain. Overall, across the urban containment boundary, we found a 2% decline in canopy cover between 2018 and 2021. Now, there were some limitations in terms of the data that was analyzed for this project related to seasonality and other factors, which mean that our findings are somewhat overestimating the amount of loss that has been experienced in a real world context, if you will. However, our analysis allows us to confidently say that there has indeed been a trend in canopy loss observed in West Vancouver between 2018 and 2021, which is an important thing for us to be aware of as we start thinking about recommendations and how we approach the urban forest management plan. A few things to note about the patterns that we noticed for change in canopy cover. Certainly at a neighborhood level, there were a few neighborhoods where we experienced statistically significant loss, and this included Rogers Creek, Westmount, British Properties 19, and Sunset Beach. For Rogers Creek, of course, that's the area where we found the most dense canopy loss, certainly, of course, related to larger forested areas being cleared for new development, whereas the neighborhoods of Westmount and British Properties, we're really finding that there is some finer scale canopy loss that seems to be predominantly related to redevelopment. And then along Sunset Beach, it was essentially related to some vegetation clearing along the highway and power lines. Now, we also did find some interesting pockets where we could notice some canopy growth. In this example from Dunderave, you can clearly see that some tree planting that likely occurred after development led to significant amount of localized canopy growth. In addition to understanding changes in canopy cover, we also wanted to get a sense of indicators for forest health. Of course, knowing that climate change already is posing quite a challenge to a lot of our forests. And the data that you see on this map here is from provincial aerial surveys that can detect large scale forest issues. And a few of the findings here are that there's definitely some areas where we have monitored some large scale drought mortality, particularly for Western red cedar and Douglas fir. And of course, there's also some localized impact from that 2018 wildfire. And also outside of the boundaries of the urban forest were some large scale areas really impacted by hemlock looper, which is of course, all of those impacts are ones that we have heard anecdotally and know from research are also occurring at a finer scale throughout the district and certainly creating some challenges in the management of the urban forest. Part of our data analysis is also trying to identify areas where really significant tree stands are found. And what this map here is showing you is in those very small little black dots, some of the tallest trees in the district, taller than 45 meters, overlaid with data from Metro Vancouver's sensitive ecosystem inventory. And this is really just one of the ways we can start thinking about and identifying areas where perhaps we can find some of the older, most mature stands in West Vancouver, in areas where protection might be something that we want to consider more seriously, and certainly includes a lot of areas that are already within parks and very well visited, beautiful mature forest stands that you are likely also familiar with. In addition to all of that analysis, we also did take a look at trends in distribution of canopy height. And we looked at 3 different classes of canopy cover. So very high canopy cover was defined as greater than 45 meters in height, whereas high canopy was anywhere between 8 and 45 meters, and medium canopy cover between 2 and 8 meters. And for context, any canopy that was below 2 meters was not defined as tree and rather identified as vegetation, so excluded from that analysis. Canopy height, of course, is an interesting metric to better understand the structure of your forest and think about areas related to protection and and better understanding the composition of the urban forest. One caveat that I want to bring up in terms of how we think about this analysis certainly is that when we're looking at this data, we're really talking about tree canopy height and not tree height. And so what I mean by this is that when we are looking at canopy cover as a whole set across the urban containment boundary within West Vancouver, we're identifying areas of canopy that are within those different height classes. And just to give you an example of what I mean here, we have an example of a very tall tree, which would be at greater than 45 meters in height. The way this data analysis works means that we're looking from above and identify which height class each of the canopy areas falls within. And for this single tree, of course, we're finding that the very top of the tree in the middle is very high and falls above 45 meters. However, most of the canopy cover in this tree, in fact, is actually found within the high canopy height class. That is between 8 and 45 meters. And therefore, when we're talking reporting canopy cover heights, we're not really talking about very high canopy representing the contribution of total canopy cover from very tall trees. Because in this one example, this one very tall tree would be composed of a mix of very high canopy as well as high canopy cover. So there's a little bit of a limitation here in terms of how we can interpret those results. Nonetheless, as I mentioned, an interesting way to find out a little bit more about the composition of your urban forest and changes over time. So you see on this map here areas of, in red are the very high canopy cover areas, as well as darker green representing high canopy cover. What we found is that overall in 2021, within your existing neighborhoods, 61% of your canopy falls within that high category and 38% falls within the medium, and only about 1% is within the very high canopy cover height. We didn't find that there was a significant, statistically significant change in height classes at in the whole existing neighborhood level. And within those existing neighborhoods that experienced statistically significant loss, including Westmount and British Properties 19, as well as Rogers Creek, we did find some changes, particularly in the high and very high canopy classes, meaning that some of that loss is likely to have resulted from the loss of some high or very high trees. Another piece that we're touching on in the State of the Urban Forest report, which will be further looked into and expanded into the Urban Forest Management Plan, is starting to think about tree equity. Now, if you think back to the first map I showed you, which was demonstrating or showing the differences in canopy cover distribution across the district, you certainly have noticed that, of course, canopy cover is not provided equally across the district. And that in and of itself can be an interesting way for us to think about how the district might prioritize things like tree plantings and other enhancements to the urban forest to try and make up for improving canopy cover where there is less that is found. However, in addition to that, our team has also been looking into a tree equity score methodology that was developed by American Forest, which is intending essentially to assess not only where to prioritize tree planting and enhancement based on lack of canopy, but also thinking about areas where people might most benefit from having more trees. And so what this map is showing here in red is the highest priority based on two pieces. So one, areas that have highest surface temperature, so urban heat, which may in most benefit from trees as a cooling mechanism, as well as areas that have more vulnerable populations in terms of social economics living in those areas. And together, those two pieces are really helping us highlight not only, in thinking about where we might enhance the urban forest, places that might most benefit from having more trees there. And so taking that together with differences in existing canopy cover will help us inform how we might recommend prioritizing resources and enhancements to the urban forest. And then finally, in terms of speaking about this report, I also wanted to mention, of course, as I mentioned that previously, that we did look at the municipal urban forest program and assess it against a set of criteria and indicators for sustainable urban forestry. And that allowed us to notice a few things. So certainly the district appears to be performing fairly well in terms of collaboration and its management of the urban forest and community awareness for the importance of the urban forest. There's also a good number of policies that are in place to work towards the protection of the urban forest, and really interesting initiatives Like, for example, the fact that the Parks Department has a program to reuse wood biomass to build park furniture. And that analysis also indicates, of course, that there's a number of areas for improvements, and particularly a relationship to tree planting program, as well as tree risk management, which is very reactive at the moment. And so our team will be using findings from that report card to help inform, again, some of the recommendations for the urban forest program that will be developed in the urban forest management plan. Now, in going from all of those findings in the State of the Urban Forest report, how is it that our team is going to be bringing that into the urban forest management plan? Well, the district hired us to work on this plan with a few objectives in mind, and they include certainly looking to retain and plant more trees, as well as maintain or enhance current canopy cover. We're also going to be working on the plan so that it can help address some of the climate change challenges, as well as encourage the protection of trees and natural ecosystem. We're also looking to, as an opportunity through this plan, to increase community understanding and support for the urban forest and promote protection of healthy trees and tree planting during development. Some of the ways in which our findings from the State of the Urban Forest report will inform the plan will be, of course, looking to stabilize canopy cover and find approaches to address canopy loss on private land, as well as look to recommend some updates to bylaws and policies to better reflect best practices and community values, as well as improvements in the currently very reactive urban forest management program at the municipality. We'll also be keeping in mind, of course, current resource availability, as well as high level of demand for services on district land, and certainly at the forefront be seeking to respond to the many challenges brought about by climate change, while looking to improve the distribution of those ecosystem services across the district. In terms of our next step, we will be drafting the urban forest management plan starting at the end of this community engagement, so the summer and into the fall, and then we'll be coming back to the community with a draft plan for your input later this year before we finalize a draft and go present it to your council. And so with that, we'll now be ready to move to the conversation part of the session. And before I get us there, just in closing for the presentation, there's two areas that we really want to hear from you about. We'll start the conversation by talking about the current state of the urban forest, to hear from you what are perhaps the most important challenges that you would like the plan to address, as well as where you see the greatest opportunities to improve the urban forest. And then we'll close the presentation or the conversation, I should say, by talking about a vision for the urban forest. And we're really hoping to hear from you about what you most value about West Vancouver's urban forest, and imagining it a few decades from now, what your ideal image for that urban forest would be like.